Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. In recent months, I'm sure that you've heard me and others of the new black media who have been talking about the concept of so-called universal basic income, which is also known as guaranteed income. The entire concept behind the UBI is to take people who are below the poverty line and to raise them up through government and or private grants. Basically, they get a monthly stipend for a couple of years. UBI as a concept, at least as it was presented, was supposed to be to help poor people. And in the United States, that means no one's more deserving or needing of it than black people. Now, for a while, you had a number of black feminists who were rejoicing that they had helped to, as they put it, pioneer some universal basic income schemes in their respective states like Mississippi, and these programs were going to be earmarked specifically for black women. Their big thing was that this would mean these black women wouldn't need to be depending on a man, and that's important for their independence. They're more needing of it than everyone else. Never mind the fact that most of these women got themselves in their financial dire straits precisely because they didn't have a man, but we won't discuss that any further. There was a big push by the white media to spin it as a black girl magic moment. You had all the usual suspects applauding it, with all the emphasis being on the girl part. This was to drive the old gender-warring nonsense that black women's interests are completely separate from black men. The black community is not one group, it's a bunch of fighting factions is what they would like to try to promote. And there were some folks playing right along with it. And so we saw the implementation of these so-called initiatives that would give poor single black mothers a few extra $100 a month for about a year or two. And one of the black women who helped to spearhead one of these initiatives is herself a business owner. She runs a beauty shop and she used the money that she got to improve her business. Now, the concept behind universal basic income is supposed to be to raise one's standard of living, not as a business grant. And not to sound messy, but when I think about poor single mothers living below the poverty line, a woman who owns her own beauty shop isn't necessarily the first thing that comes to my mind. But okay, I guess. However, when dealing with these poor single black mothers, there were all kinds of strings that came attached with this universal basic income money. There were qualifications that had to be met, the first being their income. You had to fall below a certain income just to even put your name on the application. If you made too much money, you didn't qualify. Other criterion also had to be met as well, but this money was earmarked for black women, and to the Shea Butter set, this was a W, a big one, because it established that black women were going to be getting financial means out of the American system on their own, separate from black men. They were separating, divesting themselves. This was part of the divestment. Though you'll recall what I and others who commented on this particular event told you, that no matter how much black girl magic chants were going on, it wouldn't be long at all before this UBI/guaranteed income scheme would start being applied to other groups, and that there wouldn't be all those strings attached for them. It started, of course, in the land of fruits and nuts, California, which announced that it would have a UBI scheme of its own, and it would be tied to one's income or employment status as it relates to COVID. So, in California, all you had to be was somebody who merely said that you were affected financially by COVID, and you could get a check, and it was open to everyone. They were already lowering the barriers to entry, and since there was nothing earmarking it for the poorest people, that of course means that black people would have little chance of getting anything from this UBI program there. The Shea Butter bootlicks weren't smiling so wide after this. They weren't strutting and bragging on themselves. Well, this week, Palm Springs, California, which made headlines for having the first all-LGBT city council, and they've also got a transgender mayor, well, they've announced that they're conducting a study to lay the groundwork for their own local universal basic income initiative. However, this one would be only for people who identify as transgender or non-binary. This isn't even for gays, lesbians, or bisexuals. This is just for transgenders and non-binaries. So we see a UBI scheme that narrows who qualifies for it, but not on the basis of race, but on the basis of sexual orientation. But there's more. The Palm Springs UBI initiative will be given to its trans or non-binary recipients with practically no strings attached, and best of all, the plan is that it's going to be done regardless of income. You heard me right. Whereas black women couldn't get a UBI check without being below a certain income level, Palm Springs' idea is going to be to award their UBI money regardless of their income. Now, there are those who are trying to say that it wouldn't be done like that, that basically this is a distortion of a claim that the UBI money would be earmarked regardless of your employment status or your educational background. But come on. I thought the entire purpose of universal basic income was to elevate the poor. It's a concept that's supposed to be based on income. I mean, it's in the name. But we see that very quickly it's changed from that. And notice that unlike, say, H.R. 40, it didn't take Palm Springs 40 years for this study to get rolling. They didn't need decades of committee debates about it either. They're getting the study underway quick. This is all doubly interesting to me because one of the things we've often heard in the media is that people who identify as LGBT tend to make more money and have a higher level of education than the heterosexual community. If that's the case, then isn't a UBI tailored for people who are, as the media reports, above average income counterintuitive? It's the very opposite of what the UBI is supposed to be for. So in very short order, the UBI scheme that was the pride of the shea butter crowd has gone from being expanded so as to limit the number of black women who might qualify to just flat out not including black women at all. It's gone from being based entirely on one's income to now being based entirely on how you identify. So the concept of UBI has been divorced from income altogether. In a rational world, that would defeat the entire purpose of doing it, but we don't live in a rational world. We live in a world run by white supremacy, a world where black people fight for affirmative action only to see the white government define fully 50% of the white population, white women, to be minorities. And then they also include white men as minorities so long as they don't identify as heterosexual. See, no one in this Palm Springs UBI thing is talking about black people at all. They're not talking about allies. They're not talking about this being divisive or worrying about what black people, the poorest folks in town, would think of this. They're not trying to broaden it to include us or even have us in the discussion. They're not talking about minority coalitions or minority anything. The mayor of Palm Springs, who is transgender, isn't pulling a Kamala Harris and saying, "You think I'm going to do something that's only going to benefit transgenders?" No! In other words, none of the kind of talk that black people are told when we speak up for our own interests. You always got these black folks who think that they're somehow going to escape blackness and to become an island unto themselves, and that they can get some of the white liberals who encourage them to this nonsense to subsidize them. Well, your island is sinking. No, a rising tide does not lift all boats, not when your boat has a bunch of holes in it, and the holes were put there by the very people blaming you for the fact that your boat is sinking. Now, with a UBI scheme that's based entirely on how you identify yourself, which really can't be truthfully verified, the question, of course, that comes out of it naturally is there going to be a whole lot of folks who are not trans or not non-binary who simply will claim that they are just to get a check? I guess we'll see, but one thing is certain. Any black people who have this idea that they will become this separate subgroup based on gender, sexual orientation, or some other form of intersectionalism, you're just playing a game with yourself. And you better believe this white supremacist society is not going to play along with you. We're told constantly that there's never any money for black people. There's always some decades-long process, endless excuses. The idea, it isn't feasible, as Bernie Sanders put it. And as I've told you, neither Bernie nor the rest of these left-leaning racists would dare say that to any of these other groups. And here they are, proving it. Nobody's asking, how are we going to afford this? Nobody's saying, where's the money going to come from? And nobody's saying, can't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps? We need to be seeking remedies that don't involve the taxpayers having to cough up anything. They're not doing that. No talk about handouts. No demonizing them as just wanting something given to them. The question isn't how much is it going to cost. It's just how's the best way to get it to them. Because in this white supremacist toilet masquerading as a country, doing something that benefits black people is the only thing they can't afford. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Black Boy Logic, Daryl Tillman, Ginger Vine, Alfredo Roberts, and Sakina Collins. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.